Serious employers of Reddit, what is the weirdest or creepiest thing you found during a background check on a potential employee? Years ago, was interviewing someone who listed being a supervisor at a Starbucks as part of her resume. Asked her to share a story about tough conflict resolution. She shares that she caught an employee stealing. She said it was tough because she couldn't tell anyone. Why? Because it would get him in trouble. Okay, so how did you deal with it? I tried to talk to him, but he wouldn't stop. So then whenever he was going to steal something, I did it for him, so he wouldn't get in trouble. There was no sense of wrongdoing on her part. No guilt. Seemed kind of proud of her answer, perhaps thinking I would be quite impressed with how she handled it. I walked out and had a hard time figuring out if this was one of those fancy interview consultants that higher ups sent to see how we react, or if she was just nuts. One time we had this girl come in for an interview and she killed it. Super friendly, professional, well spoken, and she had experience. Googled her name and immediately found a video of her stealing a butt plug from the local sex toy place. The company posted it online and all the comments consisted of people naming her because she was well known in the student community. I never felt such intense second-hand embarrassment, and while she was obviously in the wrong to steal, the company publicly shaming her was so unprofessional. Anyway, I hear she moved away after that. Poor girl. I was a hiring manager for a while at my place of employment. Had a decent candidate. He was applying for an overpass position, so his slight lack of social skills wasn't too bad. He had a decent work history and told us he'd been through a recent divorce and had been down on his luck for a while, which explained an 18-month gap in employment. He answered no to the conviction question. His drug test was fine, so I started his background check and told him we'd bring him back in to finish up paperwork once it was returned. 4 days later, the check was still pending, which usually suggests that the candidate has some sort of record and our hours dept is investigating. A week and a half passes and candidate has called a few times asking what's up. I have no answer. Finally, I get the big do not hire on his status, as well as an email from ours. The email was basically along the lines of do not hire candidate. Do not contact candidate. If candidate comes into your location, insist he leaves immediately. I never saw the guy after that, and I don't know what they found. So we were hiring people that needed a really high level education in order to work for us, and the filtered applications came through to me. I saw a great resume and told him to come in for an interview. The interviewee told me that this guy was a total loser. He came in dressed in pajamas, flip-flops, uncombed hair, the whole deal. I was surprised BC his resume looked amazing. Harvard graduate, etc. I did some more background research because I was so curious. Ended up finding out that this guy was a multi-millionaire from a computer startup tech. To this day I don't understand why he wanted to work for us. One of the first things we do is Google you and check out your FB. My favorite profile picture was of this girl's butt, zoomed in. Lacy underwear. Made me laugh. Lock down your FB and have a decent profile picture before you turn in your resume. I was hiring for a mid-level technology related position and a middle-aged guy applied. He had a decently relevant background, so I called him in for an interview. You know how they say to bring printed copies of your resume to an interview? This guy had brought several copies printed on resume paper, bound in one of those document folders with the clear front page along with reference letters and app kinds of other stuff. He was really earnest throughout the interview, like trying way too hard. Otherwise he does relatively okay, but definitely not better than the maybe pile. At the end he decides to straight up drop the bombshell that he's a convicted sex offender due to molesting a child. Then he decided to try and reassure us by telling us that it wasn't like he was out on the streets like a predator. The child was a relative. Like that somehow made it better. Then he proceeded to tell us about all the tax benefits that would be available to us for hiring him. It was really strange. Wasn't in charge of hiring, but I used to run background checks for potential workers and volunteers at an animal shelter. A middle-aged guy wanted to volunteer, and we have to make sure that people don't have any history of animal abuse among other things. Found a nasty assault and theft charge against him from 10 years prior, and after that it was like the guy completely disappeared off the radar. Had to call and ask him to explain what he did during those years, because there might be a mistake. Couldn't get a hold of him. A couple more days pass, and I see his mugshot on the news. He was in prison, and had just escaped 2 days prior to wanting to volunteer, was on the run. Was interviewing potential candidates for a driving position. 60-year-old male comes in, wins me over, heart and soul. Just a real dedicated guy, really professed the love of his family, extremely polite. Background search revealed several drug charges and armed robberies from over 20 years ago. I really wanted to hire him anyway, but that was a huge no-go at my company. Girl was hired before her background check results came back as the position desperately needed to be filled. 2 days later she was let go once it came out that she had been convicted of illegally disposing of a corpse. Her explanation was that someone had overdosed in her/her so's home, and they didn't want to be charged for that. Not in ours, but I sit next to them and often hear amazing tales. Weirdest one I can think of was a guy who on his resume listed a special skill of I can tell if someone has diarrhea just by their smell, along with an extensive explanation of his ability to diagnose gastrointestinal problems by using his nose. On a resume. Googling his name led, in turn, to various fetish websites, and, well, he was out of the running. Kind of the other side of the coin. I live in a very small country in Southeast Asia. My name is common in my home Western country, but stands out as foreign here. When you Google my name in this Asian country, there immediately comes up about 50 references to a jailed pedophile in the country's capital. He's also from my home country, and about my same age. It creeps me out to think that my employer, prospective employer, or new friends might make a misconnection if they try to check me out on Google. My story doesn't exactly fit the question, because I was not the employer in the case, but it's along the same lines. I used to work in a place that also provided volunteer employment for men getting out of prison to give them retail experience and something to put on their resume. We were not generally told what sort of offenses the men were incarcerated for. Our supervisor knew, but the employees were not given that information. However, a lot of the time they would tell us themselves. Usually it was things like drug charges or fraud. There was one man, however, that always stood out. He seemed very well educated, well spoken, very organized. I'm not saying that well educated people never go to prison. Of course they do. However, the men we usually dealt with generally didn't fit that description. My co-workers and I were all curious what kind of crime he might have committed. One day, one of my co-workers happened to see a piece of paper or something with his name on it. We usually only knew them by their first names. He decided to Google it. Obviously, we are not supposed to do that, hence the no last names policy. But he did anyway, and discovered that this guy had killed one of his foster children. We were all a little shocked. We'd had murderers before, but they had been drug beefs and shit like that. Not child killers. I had a hard time working with him after that, but luckily he was only with us for a few months. He never did tell us himself what he had done, and of course we couldn't say anything. It was awkward though. This happened to me in February 2016. This woman interviewed with me, and I made her an offer contingent on her passing a state background check. She suddenly tries telling me I don't need to run one on her, in which I reply I absolutely need to, and it was state regulation. She let it go. I run the background, which takes about 2 full business days before I can get the results and leave my office for the weekend. Come back on the Wednesday afterwards, and the background is waiting. There were more red flags than I've ever seen. This was a few of things that came back. Criminal harassment. A pending felony DUI with leaving the scene of an accident. Endangering the welfare of a child. I obviously call the woman and tell her we would not be able to hire her, and she wigs out on the phone, calling me a liar and other nonsense. So I calmly read all of her information she gave me back to her, and she confirmed it all but couldn't explain the results. I stand by my decision and tell her good luck. Wasn't done though, unfortunately. I leave for lunch and come back to my secretary telling me that I had a couple there to see me. Lady shows up with her boyfriend and tries to combo guilt/intimidate me into changing my mind. I read her the state regulations verbatim and tell her it could cost us our provider number. I wish I was making this next part up. With this guy present, she offers me a blowjob to overlook all of this and hire her. At this point I tell her to leave my office and tell her not to come back. I tell my secretary under no circumstances to let them back into the building and call the executive director and owner to tell them about what happened. During the call I get a post-it note from my secretary who tells me that the couple are out in the parking lot looking around at cars and she called the police. Cops show up and they think of some BS excuse like lost their keys in the lot. I immediately tell the police what happened and they escorted them off the property. I was needing to hire a person to do cold calling for me a few years ago. Came across a woman on Indeed.com that I thought was perfect for the job. So I started looking her up online and came across her Facebook page. It was basically covered with nothing but anti-Obama rants and claiming he was the literal Antichrist. And she had links to her YouTube page where she had a video explaining how she had a dream that proves this. Suffice to say I never contacted her. Interviewed a woman once and it went pretty well. I had a cubicle, so we used my boss office since my boss was out of town. She gives the right answers and had related experience in a somewhat specialized field. Calm, composed, generally on point. Mentally, I had placed her in the top 2 contenders. When I got back to my desk from dropping her off at the elevator bank, there is an email from ours with the subject line "Please call us immediately." The voicemail light is also flashing. What follows are a series of gradually more panicked messages from the our rep, starting with "Hello, Alan, this is your our rep. Hoping to catch you before your interview. Call me." Ending with "Alan, call me right now." Apparently when the candidate came in, Bowers made a mistake and sent her on the wrong interview with another manager offering a similar position, but not the one she was looking for. She figured this out abruptly and somewhat rudely ended the interview, then went back 2 hours. This manager called up Bowers and said, "Hey, there's been a mistake, but you should know this person went kind of bonkers." In hours, the candidate screamed at the assistant, called her names like stupid and retarded, then insisted on going on the interview with me. The assistant was a newbie and sent her on the correct interview, then went into her boss office and broke down in tears. The calls were various our people trying to locate this person and have her escorted from the building.